Imagine a country so powerful that its currency is used across the globe. A nation with military bases in more than 70 countries. A country whose movies, technology, businesses, and culture influence billions of people every single day. From Apple and Microsoft to Google and Hollywood. From NASA to Wall Street. From the White House to the Pentagon. The United States has become one of the most influential nations in modern history. But here's the surprising part. Just 250 years ago, the United States didn't even exist. There were no skyscrapers, no Silicon Valley, no New York Stock Exchange dominating global finance, no world's strongest military. Instead, there were only 13 small British colonies stretched along the eastern coast of North America. So how did those small colonies transform into the world's greatest superpower? Was it because of war? Economic genius? Geography? Natural resources? Or was it simply luck? The answer is far more fascinating than most people realize. In this documentary, we'll uncover the incredible journey of America's rise, from a struggling group of colonies to the world's most powerful nation. And by the end of this video, you'll understand why the United States changed the course of world history forever. To understand America's rise, we must first go back to the 1600s. At that time, North America looked completely different. The land was already home to hundreds of indigenous nations with diverse cultures, languages, and political systems. Meanwhile, several European powers, including Britain, France, Spain, and the Netherlands, were competing to establish colonies. Among them, Britain began building settlements along the Atlantic coast. The first permanent English settlement, Jamestown, was established in Virginia in 1607. A few years later, settlers seeking religious freedom founded Plymouth Colony. Over the next century, more settlements appeared. Eventually, Britain controlled 13 colonies stretching from present-day New Hampshire to Georgia. At first, these colonies were small and heavily dependent on Britain. They relied on British protection, British trade, British manufactured goods, and British laws. But life in America was different from life in Europe. Land was more abundant. People had greater opportunities to own farms and businesses. Communities developed their own local governments. Over time, many colonists became accustomed to managing their own affairs. This growing sense of independence would eventually reshape history. They relied on British protection, British trade, British manufactured goods, and British laws. But life in America was different from life in Europe. Land was more abundant. People had greater opportunities to own farms and businesses. Communities developed their own local governments. Over time, many colonists became accustomed to managing their own affairs. A group of colonists boarded British ships in Boston Harbor and dumped large quantities of tea into the water. The event became known as the Boston Tea Party. Britain responded with stricter laws and military measures. Instead of restoring order, these actions pushed many colonists closer together. The relationship between Britain and its colonies was approaching a breaking point. This growing sense of independence would eventually reshape history. Everything changed after the 7 Years' War, which ended in 1763. Britain had defeated France and gained vast territories in North America, but victory came at a tremendous cost. The British government had accumulated enormous debt. To recover financially, Parliament decided that the American colonies should contribute more through taxes. New measures such as the Stamp Act, the Townshend Acts, and the Tea Act increased tensions. Many colonists objected, not necessarily because they opposed taxes altogether, but because they had no elected representatives in the British Parliament. Their famous slogan became, "No taxation without representation." Protests spread across the colonies. One of the most famous incidents occurred in 1773. A group of colonists boarded British ships in Boston Harbor and dumped large quantities of tea into the water. The event became known as the Boston Tea Party. Britain responded with stricter laws and military measures. Instead of restoring order, these actions pushed many colonists closer together. The relationship between Britain and its colonies was approaching a breaking point. In April 1775, fighting broke out between British troops and colonial militias at Lexington and Concord. The American Revolutionary War had begun. At first, the odds seemed overwhelming. Britain possessed one of the strongest armies and navies in the world. The colonies had fewer resources, less training, and limited equipment. Yet they had one powerful advantage. They were fighting for independence. The Continental Army, led by George Washington, struggled through difficult winters, shortages of supplies, and numerous defeats. But Washington kept the army together. Foreign support also proved crucial. France, hoping to weaken Britain after losing territory in North America, provided money, weapons, troops, and naval support. Spain and the Dutch Republic also contributed in different ways. The turning point came in 1781 when British General Charles Cornwallis surrendered at Yorktown. 2 years later, the Treaty of Paris officially recognized the independence of the United States. A new nation had been born. Winning independence was only the beginning. The new United States faced enormous challenges. The country had debt. Its economy was fragile. The central government was weak. Different states often disagreed with one another. Many people questioned whether this new experiment in self-government could survive. To solve these problems, delegates met in Philadelphia in 1787. There, they drafted the United States Constitution. The Constitution created a stronger federal government while dividing power among three branches. Legislative, executive, judicial, this system of checks and balances was designed to prevent any one branch from becoming too powerful. In 1789, George Washington became the first president of the United States. His leadership helped establish many traditions that still influence American government today. Although political disagreements emerged almost immediately, the peaceful transfer of power became one of the defining features of the young republic. This stability encouraged investment, trade, and long-term planning. By the early 1800s, the United States remained a relatively small country along the Atlantic coast. Everything changed in 1803. France, led by Napoleon Bonaparte, controlled a vast territory west of the Mississippi River known as Louisiana. Facing expensive wars in Europe and difficulties in the Caribbean, Napoleon decided to sell the territory. President Thomas Jefferson seized the opportunity. For $15 million, the United States purchased approximately 828,000 square miles of land. The deal nearly doubled the size of the country. It became one of the most significant land purchases in history. The Louisiana Purchase opened vast opportunities for agriculture, settlement, trade, and future economic growth. It also strengthened America's long-term strategic position on the North American continent. After acquiring new territory, Americans began moving westward in increasing numbers. Farmers searched for fertile land. Entrepreneurs sought new business opportunities. Trappers explored forests and rivers. Entire communities relocated in search of a better future. The government encouraged westward expansion through policies that promoted settlement. Explorers such as Meriwether Lewis and William Clark mapped much of the newly acquired territory, providing valuable information about the region's geography, wildlife, and indigenous peoples. However, expansion also had profound consequences. Many Native American nations were displaced from their ancestral lands through treaties, conflict, and forced removals. One of the most tragic examples was the Trail of Tears, during which thousands of Cherokee and other indigenous people were forced to relocate under harsh conditions. Understanding America's rise requires recognizing both its remarkable achievements and the heavy costs borne by others. History is rarely a story of only triumph or only tragedy. It is often both. One reason the United States grew so rapidly was something it did not create: its geography. The country possessed vast areas of fertile farmland. Long navigable rivers such as the Mississippi connected inland regions to major ports. The Atlantic and Pacific Oceans provided access to international trade while also acting as natural barriers against invasion. The United States was rich in natural resources, including timber, coal, iron ore, and, later, oil. These resources would become the foundation of one of the largest industrial economies in history. Unlike many European powers, the United States also avoided repeated large-scale wars on its own mainland after the early 19th century. This allowed the country to invest heavily in infrastructure, agriculture, and industry. By the mid-1800s, America was no longer a fragile experiment. It was becoming a nation with enormous potential. But a crisis was approaching, one that threatened to tear the country apart. The Civil War that nearly destroyed the United States. Abraham Lincoln and the fight to preserve the Union. The abolition of slavery. The Industrial Revolution that transformed America into an economic powerhouse. Railroads, steel, oil, immigration, and the birth of modern capitalism. By the middle of the 19th century, the United States was expanding faster than ever before. New towns were being built. Railroads stretched across the country. Factories were producing more goods than ever. Millions of immigrants arrived from Europe in search of opportunity. On the surface, America looked like a nation destined for greatness. But beneath that progress lay a conflict that had been growing for decades. The issue was slavery. In the southern states, large plantations depended heavily on enslaved labor to produce crops such as cotton and tobacco. The northern states, meanwhile, were becoming increasingly industrialized. Factories, railroads, and manufacturing created a different kind of economy. And many people in the north opposed the expansion of slavery into new territories. The disagreement was not only about economics. It was also about political power, states' rights, and the future direction of the nation. As new states joined the Union, every debate over whether slavery would be allowed became more intense. The country was becoming deeply divided. In 1860, Abraham Lincoln was elected President of the United States. Lincoln opposed the expansion of slavery into new territories, though his initial goal was preserving the Union rather than immediately abolishing slavery everywhere. Many Southern leaders feared their influence in the federal government would decline. Soon after Lincoln's election, several Southern states declared that they were leaving the Union. They formed the Confederate States of America. The United States now faced its greatest crisis since independence. Would the Union survive? Or would the country split into two separate nations? In April 1861, Confederate forces attacked Fort Sumter in South Carolina. The Civil War had begun. It would become the deadliest conflict in American history. Brother fought against brother. Families were divided. Entire cities were destroyed. The Union, led by President Lincoln, possessed several advantages. It had a larger population, more factories, greater railroad networks, and stronger financial resources. The Confederacy, however, had experienced military commanders and was fighting on familiar territory. For 4 long years, battles raged across the country. Gettysburg, Antietam, Shiloh, Vicksburg. Each battle left thousands dead or wounded. By 1863, President Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation, declaring that enslaved people in Confederate-held territory were free. While it did not immediately end slavery everywhere, it changed the moral and political meaning of the war and discouraged foreign powers from supporting the Confederacy. Finally, in April 1865, Confederate General Robert E. Lee surrendered to Union General Ulysses S. Grant at Appomattox Courthouse. The Civil War was over. The Union had survived. Soon afterward, the 13th Amendment abolished slavery throughout the United States. Just days later, President Lincoln was assassinated, shocking the nation. The country had been saved, but at an enormous human cost. At first glance, the Civil War looked like a disaster. Hundreds of thousands of people lost their lives. Cities and infrastructure were devastated. The economy suffered. Yet historians argue that the war also transformed the United States in important ways. The federal government emerged stronger than before. The country remained united. A single national market continued to develop. Railroads expanded across state lines. Banks became more integrated. Large industries grew rapidly. In many ways, the Civil War accelerated the modernization of the American economy. The nation was now ready for a new chapter, one that would make it one of the richest countries in the world. The late 1800s changed America forever. Factories appeared in nearly every major city. Steam engines powered industry. Steel production increased dramatically. Coal mines expanded. New machines allowed workers to produce goods faster and more efficiently than ever before. Railroads connected the East Coast to the West Coast. Raw materials could now travel thousands of miles in just days instead of weeks. Farmers gained access to distant markets. Businesses expanded nationwide. Transportation costs fell. Economic growth accelerated. The United States was no longer just an agricultural nation. It was becoming an industrial giant. No invention transformed America more than the railroad. By the end of the 19th century, hundreds of thousands of miles of railway tracks crossed the country. Railroads connected farms to cities, mines to factories, factories to ports, people to new opportunities. Entire towns emerged around railway stations. Goods moved faster. Mail arrived sooner. Businesses reached customers across the continent. The railroad became the backbone of the American economy. As transportation improved, new industries flourished. Steel became the foundation of bridges, railways, ships, and skyscrapers. One of the most influential industrialists was Andrew Carnegie. His steel companies revolutionized construction and manufacturing. At the same time, another entrepreneur transformed a different industry, oil, John D. Rockefeller founded Standard Oil, which grew into one of the largest companies in history. Through efficiency and large-scale operations, Standard Oil helped reduce costs and expand the use of petroleum products. The growth of these industries fueled rapid economic expansion, though it also raised concerns about monopolies and the concentration of economic power. This eventually led to new government regulations designed to promote competition. America's growing economy created an enormous demand for workers. Between the late 1800s and the early 1900s, millions of immigrants arrived from countries such as Italy, Germany, Ireland, Poland, Russia, Scandinavia, and many others. They built railroads, worked in factories, opened businesses, helped develop farms, contributed to scientific research, and strengthened the nation's workforce. Life was often difficult. Many immigrants faced discrimination, unsafe working conditions, and low wages. Yet over time, their contributions became an important part of America's economic and cultural development. The United States became one of the world's most diverse nations. That diversity would later become one of its greatest strengths. The late 19th century was also an age of extraordinary innovation. American inventors and entrepreneurs developed technologies that transformed everyday life. Thomas Edison helped popularize practical electric lighting and improved systems for generating and distributing electricity. Alexander Graham Bell patented the telephone, revolutionizing communication. The Wright brothers achieved the first successful powered airplane flight in 1903. Factories became more productive. Cities became brighter. Transportation became faster. Communication became nearly instantaneous. Innovation became a defining feature of the American economy. Universities, businesses, and inventors increasingly worked together to develop new technologies. This culture of innovation would continue for generations. By the early 1900s, the transformation was remarkable. The United States had become one of the world's largest industrial economies. Its factories produced steel, machinery, textiles, and consumer goods on an enormous scale. Its railroads linked a vast domestic market. Its natural resources fueled manufacturing. Its banks financed new businesses. Its growing population created strong demand for products and services. The foundations of American power had been laid, but the country's influence was still largely regional. That was about to change. A conflict in Europe would soon pull the United States onto the world stage. And after two world wars, America would emerge stronger than any nation had ever been before. By the early 20th century, the United States had become one of the world's largest industrial economies. Its factories were booming. Its railroads connected the nation. Its population had grown rapidly. Yet despite its economic strength, America was not the dominant global power. That position still belonged to the great European empires. Britain controlled colonies across the globe. France possessed a vast overseas empire. Germany had become Europe's fastest growing industrial nation. Russia ruled over millions of people across two continents. Then, in 1914, a single assassination changed history. Archduke Franz Ferdinand of Austria was killed in Sarajevo. Within weeks, Europe's complex network of alliances turned a regional crisis into the First World War. Britain, France, and Russia formed one side. Germany, Austria-Hungary, and the Ottoman Empire formed the other. The fighting spread across Europe, Africa, the Middle East, and the seas. It became the deadliest conflict the world had ever seen. At first, the United States stayed neutral. Many Americans believed the war was a European problem. President Woodrow Wilson hoped to keep the country out of the conflict. Meanwhile, American factories supplied food, machinery, and equipment to countries on both sides, particularly the Allied powers. As the war continued, the American economy expanded. Exports increased. Factories operated around the clock. Banks lent billions of dollars to Allied governments. Even before entering the war, the United States was becoming an economic powerhouse. America enters World War I. Everything changed in 1917. Germany resumed unrestricted submarine warfare, targeting ships in the Atlantic. Several American vessels were attacked. Then came the Zimmermann telegram, in which Germany proposed a military alliance with Mexico if the United States entered the war. When the message became public, American opinion shifted dramatically. President Wilson asked Congress to declare war. The United States entered World War I. Although American troops arrived relatively late, their fresh manpower and industrial support strengthened the Allied position. In 1918, Germany agreed to an armistice. The war was over. The United States had helped shape the outcome of a global conflict. More importantly, it emerged with its homeland untouched, while much of Europe lay devastated. Factories in Britain, France, and Germany had been damaged. Cities had been destroyed. Millions had lost their lives. America, by contrast, was stronger economically than before the war. For the first time, many nations owed money to the United States instead of the other way around. The balance of global financial power had begun to shift. The decade after World War, I became known as the Roaring Twenties. It was an era of optimism and rapid economic growth. Factories expanded. Cars became more affordable. Electricity reached more homes. New consumer products transformed daily life. One company symbolized this new era more than any other: Ford Motor Company. Henry Ford's use of the moving assembly line dramatically reduced production costs. Automobiles that had once been considered luxury items became affordable for millions of Americans. The Model T changed transportation forever. Roads were built, suburbs expanded, businesses flourished, radio connected families across the country. Jazz music became wildly popular. Hollywood emerged as the center of the global film industry. The American dream seemed within reach for millions. But beneath the prosperity, dangerous problems were growing. Many people were borrowing heavily to invest in the stock market. Banks made risky loans. Stock prices rose far beyond the real value of many companies. It was a financial bubble waiting to burst. On October 29, 1929, known as Black Tuesday, the American stock market collapsed. Billions of dollars in wealth disappeared within days. Banks failed. Businesses closed. Factories stopped production. Millions of workers lost their jobs. Families lost their homes. Bread lines stretched through city streets. The Great Depression became the worst economic crisis in modern history. Its effects spread far beyond the United States. Countries around the world experienced falling trade, unemployment, and financial instability. Many questioned whether capitalism itself could survive. Franklin D. Roosevelt and the New Deal. In 1933, Franklin D. Roosevelt, often called FDR, became president. He introduced a series of programs known as the New Deal. The government invested in roads, bridges, dams, schools, and public buildings. Millions of unemployed Americans found work through public projects. Banking reforms aimed to restore confidence in the financial system. Social Security was introduced to support older Americans. While historians continue to debate exactly how much the New Deal accelerated recovery, it undeniably reshaped the relationship between the federal government and the economy. By the late 1930s, the United States was recovering. Then another crisis erupted, one even greater than the first. In 1939, Germany invaded Poland. Britain and France declared war. World War II had begun. Once again, the United States initially remained neutral. But President Roosevelt recognized that events in Europe and Asia could eventually threaten American security. The US began supplying weapons, food, and equipment to allied nations through programs such as Lend-Lease. American factories increased production. Industries expanded once again. Then, on December 7, 1941, everything changed. Japanese aircraft launched a surprise attack on the US naval base at Pearl Harbor, Hawaii. More than 2,400 Americans were killed. The following day, the United States declared war on Japan. Germany and Italy soon declared war on the United States. America was now fully involved in World War II. During World War II, the United States demonstrated an industrial capacity unlike anything the world had ever seen. Factories that had once produced cars now manufactured tanks. Companies that built refrigerators began producing aircraft engines. Shipyards worked day and night. Women entered the workforce in unprecedented numbers, symbolized by the iconic image of Rosie the Riveter. American factories produced hundreds of thousands of aircraft, tens of thousands of tanks, thousands of ships, millions of rifles, vast quantities of ammunition and supplies. President Roosevelt called America the arsenal of democracy. The country's manufacturing power supplied not only American forces but also many allied nations. Industrial strength became one of the decisive factors in the Allied victory. Victory and a new world order. In 1945, Germany surrendered. A few months later, after the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki and the Soviet declaration of war against Japan, Japan also surrendered. World War II was over. The world had changed forever. Europe lay in ruins. Entire cities had been destroyed. Japan's economy had collapsed. The Soviet Union had suffered enormous human and material losses despite emerging as a military superpower. The United States, however, emerged stronger than ever. Its factories remained intact. Its economy had expanded dramatically. It possessed the world's largest gold reserves. Its military had become one of the strongest on earth. For the second time in less than 30 years, America had supplied much of the equipment needed to help defeat aggressive powers. Now, it stood at the center of the post-war international order. The birth of American global leadership after World War II, the United States played a leading role in creating new international institutions. The United Nations was established to encourage cooperation and reduce the risk of future global wars. The International Monetary Fund, IMF, and the World Bank were created to support financial stability and post-war reconstruction. The Marshall Plan provided billions of dollars in aid to help rebuild Western Europe. These initiatives strengthened America's relationships with many countries while also supporting economic recovery and international trade. The US dollar became the foundation of the Bretton Woods monetary system, reinforcing America's central role in global finance. The United States was no longer simply a wealthy nation. It had become one of the principal architects of the modern international system. But another challenge was already emerging. A former ally was becoming its greatest rival, the Soviet Union. The next conflict would not be fought primarily on traditional battlefields. It would be fought through ideology, technology, intelligence, economics, and the constant threat of nuclear war. The Cold War had begun. World War II had ended. But peace didn't last for long. The two strongest countries left standing, the United States and the Soviet Union, had fought together against Nazi Germany. Now they became rivals. The United States believed in democracy, private enterprise, and market-based economics. The Soviet Union promoted a communist system in which the state controlled much of the economy. These competing political and economic systems shaped global politics for decades. This rivalry became known as the Cold War. Unlike the two world wars, the United States and the Soviet Union never fought each other directly on a large scale. Instead, they competed through military alliances, nuclear weapons, intelligence operations, technological innovation, economic influence, proxy wars fought in other countries. The fear of nuclear conflict became one of the defining features of the era. Both nations developed vast nuclear arsenals capable of destroying each other many times over. This balance of power, often described as mutually assured destruction (MAD), discouraged direct war because both sides understood that a full-scale nuclear exchange would have catastrophic consequences. The United States understood that military power alone would not secure its position. It needed allies. In 1949, the US joined with Canada and several European countries to create the North Atlantic Treaty Organization (NATO). Its core principle was simple. An attack on one member would be treated as an attack on all. NATO strengthened cooperation among Western democracies and became one of the most enduring military alliances in modern history. The Soviet Union responded by creating the Warsaw Pact with its own allies. The world was increasingly divided into two competing blocs. This competition influenced politics across Europe, Asia, Africa, and Latin America. The Cold War was not fought only with weapons. It was also a race for scientific and technological leadership. In 1957, the Soviet Union shocked the world by launching Sputnik, the first artificial satellite. Many Americans feared the Soviet Union was pulling ahead in science and technology. The United States responded by investing heavily in education, engineering, and research. In 1958, NASA was created. What followed became one of history's greatest technological competitions. Scientists developed powerful rockets. Computers advanced rapidly. Satellite technology transformed communications. Then, on July 20th, 1969, millions watched as Apollo 11 landed on the moon. Neil Armstrong became the first human to walk on the lunar surface. His famous words echoed across the world. "That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind." The moon landing demonstrated not only scientific achievement, but also the United States' ability to mobilize talent, industry, and innovation on an extraordinary scale. Many technologies developed during the space race later found everyday applications in communications, medicine, navigation, and computing. While the Soviet Union invested heavily in military competition, the United States continued expanding its economy. American universities attracted talented students and researchers from around the world. Private companies invested in innovation. New industries emerged. California's Silicon Valley became the center of the global technology revolution. Companies such as Intel, Microsoft, Apple, Google, Amazon, Nvidia helped transform computers, software, the internet, smartphones, artificial intelligence, and cloud computing. At the same time, Wall Street became one of the world's most important financial centers. The US dollar strengthened its role as the leading international reserve currency. American companies expanded across the globe. Hollywood movies, television, music, and later streaming platforms spread American culture to audiences worldwide. Soft power, the ability to influence through culture, education, and innovation, became an important complement to military and economic strength. By the 1980s, the Soviet Union faced growing economic challenges. Its centrally planned economy struggled to keep pace with technological change. Military spending placed enormous pressure on public finances. Shortages of consumer goods became more common. Political reforms introduced by Soviet leader Mikhail Gorbachev encouraged greater openness but also exposed deeper problems. In 1989, the Berlin Wall fell, symbolizing the end of the division between East and West Germany. Just 2 years later, in 1991, the Soviet Union officially dissolved. The Cold War was over. For the first time in modern history, the United States stood as the world's only superpower. Its economy was the largest. Its military had global reach. Its technology companies were leading innovation. Its currency remained central to international finance. Its alliances extended across multiple continents. The American century, a phrase coined decades earlier, appeared to have reached its peak. Even after the Cold War, the United States remained highly influential. Its military maintained bases and partnerships around the world. Its universities continued attracting students from nearly every country. American companies shaped global technology and entertainment. The Internet, developed through decades of research involving government, universities, and private industry, accelerated globalization. At the same time, the United States faced new challenges. The terrorist attacks of September 11, 2001 led to wars in Afghanistan and Iraq. The 2008 global financial crisis exposed weaknesses in the international economy. In recent years, the rapid growth of China has introduced new economic and geopolitical competition. Artificial intelligence, cybersecurity, semiconductor manufacturing, and advanced technologies have become key areas of strategic rivalry. Many analysts now describe the international system as moving toward a more multipolar world, where several major powers play significant roles. This is one of the biggest geopolitical questions of our time. Supporters of continued American leadership point to several strengths: the world's largest economy by nominal GDP, a leading role in scientific research, global military capabilities, strong alliances, innovative private companies, deep financial markets, the continued importance of the US dollar. Others argue that rising powers such as China, along with demographic changes, technological competition, and shifting global trade patterns, could gradually reshape the balance of power. History reminds us that no empire or leading power remains unchallenged forever. But history also shows that adaptation and innovation can extend national influence for generations. The future will depend not only on military strength but also on economic resilience, technological leadership, education, diplomacy, and the ability to work with partners around the world. So, how did America become the world's superpower? The answer wasn't a single event. It wasn't one war, or one president, or one invention. It was the result of many factors coming together over centuries. A favorable geography, abundant natural resources, a growing population fueled by immigration, industrial expansion, scientific innovation, victory alongside allies in two world wars, the development of strong financial institutions, the rise of the US dollar, technological breakthroughs, global partnerships, and a remarkable capacity to adapt during moments of crisis. Of course, America's history also includes difficult chapters: slavery, civil war, discrimination, conflicts, and political divisions. Understanding both its achievements and its challenges provides a more complete picture of how the nation evolved. Today, the United States continues to play a central role in global affairs. Whether it remains the world's leading superpower throughout the 21st century is a question historians of the future will answer. But one thing is beyond doubt. The story of America's rise transformed not only one nation, it reshaped the modern world. If you enjoyed this documentary and want more deep dives into history, geopolitics, and world economics, make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss our next documentary. And now we'd love to hear from you. Do you think the United States will remain the world's leading superpower over the next 50 years? Or will another country eventually take its place? Share your thoughts respectfully in the comments below. Thanks for watching. We'll see you in the next documentary.